evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome once again to Moving Forward. There is so much to talk about on the philosophical and political level. Therefore, before I begin tonight, I want to say a prayer to thank the One Most High for the gifts that He has given us in sending us Philip Joseph Pierre. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. My brothers and sisters, we are fortunate to have Philip as our Prime Minister at this juncture of our lives, especially of this particular country. The One Most High had him to wait as he learned to perfect the stewardship of the country, even though we had to go through 5.5 long years of misery. However, the pain is now over because the good Lord gave us the strength we needed to overcome the trials and tribulations we had to face. Now the country is heading in the right direction because God is on our side, and therefore He has trust and faith in Philip Joseph Pierre. He knows best because He is without a doubt the Prince of Peace, the King of Kings, and the Lord of Lords. Amen. Tonight I quote from the Bible, from the Wisdom of Solomon, chapter 6, verses 17 to 24. Wisdom begins when you sincerely want to learn. To desire wisdom is to love her. To love her laws is to be certain of immortality. Immortality will bring you close to God. This desire for wisdom can prepare you to rule a kingdom. So then, you that rule the nations, if you value your thrones and symbols of authority, honor wisdom, so that you may rule forever. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Ladies and gentlemen, I've come to the realization that nothing can be taken for granted in politics, whether in St. Lucia or elsewhere. A classic example of this was in the United States, where even judges allowed a man's reputation or wealth, which in some cases was grossly exaggerated. They allowed this to have had its effect in the courts of law when the individual had become a known felon over 4 months before the election. Yet they kept putting back the sentences that was due and now may never come to fruition. I therefore have lost all faith in the American way of life and the American system of law and order. Recently I saw a talk show host allegedly saying to an individual called Jimmy James in Soufriere that he should by now have had the problem with his mouth dealt with because of how much money he allegedly allowed to go through his hands. If that is so, I would like to know why the ex-representative for Soufriere did not do something to help himself, but instead of taking pot shots at Labour. That's what he should have done to help. The past and present Labour representative have done so much for Soufriere that you would have thought that this individual would be grateful to those who put in so much work to improve the area and people's livelihood. Oh no, but there he is, on a bandwagon, blaming or passing all misdemeanors on the back of this unity government, when it is due to his party's disgusting mismanagement of the country on all fronts that we are now suffering. So tonight, my brothers and sisters, I want to present facts, because facts don't lie. That is for sure. Much of the politicians in the world today don't tell you the facts. More so, many in opposition. Much of what is being said in the political arena is sugar-coated or downright lie. Then when they are challenged, their way out is to say that they never did say it, or simply failing to comprehend what they said is recorded. In my view, in mentioning the above, the past representative of Soufriere, apart from his lack of clarity, much of what he now says in opposition is sheer crap, pardon the pun. Individuals like these should say the least possible, because every time they open their mouths, they seem to suffer from verbal diarrhea. As I mentioned above, I believe sincerely that we are not living in a world where we can take anything for granted, more so when promised by any politician, because for them it is all about power. Much of the feelings that engulf me are that there is so much deceit that has literally penetrated our psyche with a devastating force. It seems as if people want to believe what they want to believe. We see this with the United Records of the Poor. They are blatant in their lies and disrespect the values that our parents once stood for. The majority of our politicians today are deceitful, and that art becomes natural to them. However, having said that, there is without a doubt a few genuine politicians who really do care about the country's development more so. It's poor and downtrodden. However, they are few and far between. I believe we have deliberately induced ourselves to be what others want us to be instead of being decent, truthful, and correct in what we do. The conclusion I've come to is that many are fooling themselves, even though they know something is not right, but they want to be the one of the boys or the girls. I was confronted by a lady who actually said to me that people like me, who are knowledgeable and bright, seem not to speak in a balanced manner on television because I favor one political party. I had to laugh. Ladies and gentlemen, I was simply at a loss for words when I was told so, even to the extent when she went on to say that I'm not supposed to take sides. When in truth and in fact, I have seen both political worlds of ours and what has taken place within them. What I normally do is to take a scenario and then dissect it and explore the failings and the false impressions that one side is given. And a lot of us know which side I'm talking about. That is what I do as a researcher. Let me say to this lady or any other, if I think that this present government is doing something that I believe is wrong, and I have brought it to their attention or notice, as I've mentioned before, if no action is taken, then I will say what I have to say on the matter in the hope that the truth comes to light. Therefore, I also do want to be balanced, because what she failed to realize, every issue I tackle is in truth and in fact balancing out what the opposition puts out that is misleading and it's fabricated to the hilt. I've seen both sides of our political world, so to speak, and therefore want to be balanced at all times. Yes, what I do as a researcher is to look at what the opposing side has done in 5.5 years right now in office compared to what the president has been doing in 3 years and 3 months. The divide is like a river compared to the ocean in what has taken place, more so when one considers what was left behind. That is what they are trying their best to make people forget. And the reason why they were unceremoniously kicked out of office so badly, yet there they are trying to pluck holes into the government when they are making every effort to plug the holes they left behind, so much so an elephant can go through it. They left the medical service in a mess. Now they want to turn the tables to the extent of making such stupid and idiosyncratic statements concerning St. Jude, in that this government is propping up a hospital that has gone past its sell-by date. Then we have education that was left in a mess because of those who were at the higher echelon of that establishment. Then we can look at commerce and the way it was saddled with both a minister and a permanent secretary that were inadequate for the job as far as I am concerned. And the permanent secretary is still there. Then we saw and heard the mess they made with CIP and how they were left with egg on their faces after what we heard from the Minister of Tourism and CIP. It should have been a wake-up call for the opposition to shut up, and to an extent they did what and went on. When they suddenly realized that they were being held to account, they went on to crime and the infrastructure. Ladies and gentlemen, the list goes on because they simply have nothing to say. Even their spokesperson, both on television and radio, are simply grasping at straw as far as the work of this government is concerned. Here we have a government who's trying very hard to make things better for the people of this country. Yet, there they are, casting aspersions, when without a doubt this government is doing what they do best to make life better for the people that elected them. They keep throwing stones. This is what I term as caring for the people, what Philip Joseph Pierre is doing right now. There is something I have learned in life, and its truth is that truth is forever on the throne. The majority of those in our politics never seem to come to the people with facts, because then truth becomes too light. They don't like that. They tend to say whatever comes into their brains or mouth that they think will ruin the government's reputation and therefore cast doubt on the work they are doing. They do their best at anything that will satisfy their ego. When they are found out, they come with an even more set of lies and innuendos. That seems to be the political world we are now living in and have come to know, and therefore we have to differentiate right from wrong, good from evil. When one thinks of the amount of lies that Trump bombarded the media with, and people, some seem to ignore him, but others were so feeble-minded that they internalized what he said as true. Yet consider it. The man made some serious racist comments, yet blacks voted for him, especially black men, as far as the records show. No wonder Marcus Garvey tried in his time in the United States to make blacks believe in themselves. Ladies and gentlemen, when the whites found out that he was succeeding in making blacks believe in themselves, the white authorities went all out and brought trumped-up charges against him. Then they had the audacity to find an innocent man guilty, when the facts are there today to prove that he was innocent of all charges. Yes, we also heard Bob Marley, what he had to say about releasing ourselves from mental slavery. Even here in St. Lucia, some cannot do that. To reach the standard that the public service should reach, it takes imagination, initiative, and the ability to think and act beyond the job. That is essential. Otherwise, the skills that are needed in the leadership of the public service is sadly, for me, lacking. Yes, St. Lucia Public Service, many do have quite a few pieces of paper called diplomas, degrees, and masters, etc. But their knowledge and experience is only on paper. Therefore, many fail to realize that it takes some time to acquire wisdom. What infuriates me is when some are promoted based on what the permanent secretary thinks of them as being their friends, etc. Promotion cannot be based on whether the permanent secretary likes you or not. It has to be on merit and whether you are sufficiently competent in how you engage with your staff. However, you can see it day in and day out. When they like to put their qualification up people's noses, but useless at their jobs. Many, in my view, fail to realize that those pieces of paper are simply not enough. That is why so many are out there fumbling in the darkness of time, and the country is therefore sadly lacking of real leadership skills. Hence the conflict, commotion, and poor service. Therefore, it is important, if we are to have a strong and efficient government, it is essential that the public sector workforce have to be well trained and able to function in a manner that gives excellent public service to the people of the country. The Prime Minister, as far as I'm concerned, is pragmatic, which we don't really find in those who lead in the Caribbean politics. However, he has to have people in position who know their job and are competent at it. I just heard the Permanent Secretary of Health making a speech, and I immediately thought, does she understand or believe in what she's saying? Because the word on the ground is that, or allegedly, many have no confidence in her. Then now I can see it would be difficult to point to one important job held by the most competent persons we have. It may seem naive to argue that government should be colorblind, but wasn't that what Martin Luther King's dream was about in the United States? All citizens should be equal before the law. Yes, that's what he believed in. And it's at this juncture I will take my first break. Welcome back to Moving Forward. I was talking about Martin Luther King Jr. and where he was looking for equality for his people and believed that all citizens should be equal before the law. On another front, I believe sincerely that efforts to relieve poverty should focus on poor people. Therefore, employment has to be high. Because what we tend to see is that there are too many jobs that are out there and far too few are created. This government, therefore, is making every effort in creating employment, more so for the poor in our midst. So much so, the unemployment rate have gone down to 10% and is projected to fall even further before Christmas, one hopes. The continued economic bleakness that existed between 2016 and 2021 also created a political problem when this government took over the reins of power. Therefore, what suddenly came to the fore is that 10 or more years ago, people were remarkably willing to trust their politicians. They were ready to accept wrenching economic change, but those in power were largely unprepared for the challenge that reared its head. And during the period of that last government, what we simply came to realize is that they could not attract foreign investment that would have created the jobs needed. They were simply a government fumbling in the dark. So much so, it became a classical case of the government borrowing money to create jobs themselves, more so at call stations, borrowing from the country's national insurance scheme to allow foreigners to buy land, thereby not putting any money in the investment of the country, but using the country's own money to make a huge profits for themselves and others, as has been alleged. Within the government then, the resultant corruption and incompetence that existed then did have its effect because it squandered much public trust in the government of the day, because many were just concerned with self-enrichment. Therefore, it is clear that there is an alarming inability among politicians to communicate with the voters, and therefore have left many people feeling tired and cynical when it comes to politics. Many ruling politicians are accused of being arrogant and sleazy. What we have seen with the last administration was simply sloppy government, and that made it hard for foreigners to trust and therefore invest in the country. What got up my nose is that this did not affect them because they had that simple belief that they are always right, and I'm always right, Jack. Why was that? Because they thought that a year before the elections, they would dangle a few rotten bananas to the little man or woman, and that they would be running back to them. Did not the ex-prime minister says quite categorically that his own did not vote for him, i.e. the well-to-do of the country? What he failed to come to grips with is that attitudes had changed as well as memories, but many have not forgotten the reign of Allen, which was termed by many and was known as the Prince of Darkness. Politics is therefore not always fair, but in this case it was, because he was literally kicked out of power, and as I said before, unceremoniously. However, there is no doubt in my mind that at this juncture of our being, we have a populist prime minister. He wants to please many people and be open to many ideas before decisions are taken. You see, he sees himself as the servant of the voters and not their master. He is without a doubt an engaging prime minister regarding what some nincompoops will say, because their mouths have been poisoned with unadulterated language that befits them. A man of the people and for the people at every twist and turn, because he is that man of the people. Philip, like many in the public domain, rages against the corruption that, as alleged, took place during the period of the last government. We have two types of politicians as far as I'm concerned, or I could see. The incapable and those capable of anything. There is no doubt that service such as health bear the brunt of government's penury. Therefore, funds for antibiotics, etc., have to be given priority. The cleanup that is now necessary is aimed at securing justice and deferring future corruption, not at obtaining revenge, but doing what is just and fair. That is why the investigation by the special prosecutor is now taken, or must now come up with something, because it's taken too long. He must be positive in the direction they are taking. I want to remind the opposition something I learned a long, long time ago, especially the past Minister of Economic Management, that the glass house effect, in that those living in glass houses should not throw stones, because those stones might come back and smash them to smithereens. He seemed to be throwing quite a few of those stones, not realizing that they will come to haunt him by smashing that glass house of his to smithereens, as I mentioned before. Truth, comrades, is forever on the throne. The facts, if they are there, will come to light. And they will, somewhere, they'll find nowhere to hide. The United Records of the Poor will never beat Philip in an election as long as they have those at the echelon of the party. They are without a doubt the empty vessels that makes most noise and sound. They have been tried and tested and have failed miserably. Once again, I say to Allen's people, are not that stupid, and always put in his mind that we are a small society. And if you look at the figures, those areas that are strong labor, you cannot make a dent into them, dear boy. I can say that there are definitely 6 constituencies. The remaining 11, that's labor, the remaining 11 may be at this juncture. Just one may stay UWP. And even then, it might change if Allen is still the representative. In effect, we have about 6 to 8 that have been Labour UWP. And if Labour plan properly, they will secure many of those seats. The Prime Minister, if he keeps to his pledge to upgrade our medical services and to open St. Jude, with unemployment now at 10%, it will move down to at least 6%. When the work towards the end of the year and beginning of next year comes about, then the loopholes for the United Records of the Poor will certainly be securely closed on them. I say to the Labour hierarchy to keep to your short and long-term plans, and the government must be prepared to adjust it as the situation demands. We are certainly living in troubled times, without a doubt, comrades. In that sense of the word, I am taking into consideration whether it is a world problem, as we have seen, and how the war between Russia and Ukraine have affected supplies, and even how China's belligerence is also having an effect on the world situation. And now we have Trump, good Lord. We also have global warming and climate change beginning to have a devastating effect on the whole world. Look at Grenada right now. Floods all over the place. Therefore, our planning has to be done in an efficient and effective manner. As we have seen and witnessed, the opposition, when in power, seemed lost to the global situation. And when I say global, and I talked about Grenada, Spain, the part of Spain that I love so much, is underwater right now. One would never have thought of that, but it is. In my view, they were like, that is, the last government were like lost sheep. Even those with doctorates look and talk without purpose. They were simply looking for the miracles that never materialize. Tonight, ladies and gentlemen, I don't come just to praise Philip Joseph Pierre, but also to honor him for what he has achieved in the arduous work he has done in bringing St. Lucia forward, not only in 3 ministries, but also as the Prime Minister, and the tremendous great leap forward which has taken place and has been achieved since his coming into office as Prime Minister of the country in July 2021. He has literally put St. Lucia back on its feet, despite the horrible condition it was left in financially by the previous government. There's no doubt in my mind and many other St. Lucians that we are becoming a sick joke, that we were becoming a sick joke as a country struggling for survival. Why was this? It was simply because of the poor management of the previous government of the United Records of the Poor, led by Alan Shastney, who will go down in history as the worst Prime Minister St. Lucia has ever had, or the worst in the Caribbean as far as leaders are concerned. I want to put on record that Philip was not born with a silver spoon in his mouth, like some. His parents were hardworking and arduous in their undertaking. One parent, as we know, was a policeman, and his mother, a school teacher. Philip was always brought up in the Catholic faith and did not start going to Mass since being a politician. That was schooled in him because his parents were very religious and without a doubt had high standards. This present opposition has the audacity to give the impression that Philip is the biggest liar in our politics, yet they sit and plan with a well-known pathological liar and corner artist. They should, I think, read what was written about him by Kenneth Rejock in listening to a round table discussion by Alan and Coco Lorum, where they were discussing the high cost of living in St. Lucia and how groceries were so expensive because we have a government that failed to understand how it works. Yet, as they admitted, the world has had multiple disruptions. Therefore, supply was short and money for rent as the suppliers were waiting. More so as there were problems with the Suez Canal that was drying up and the Panama Canal likewise. Therefore, cost of transportation and supply had risen tremendously, not only due to the Ukraine-Russia war. Wheat was in short supply. Therefore, is it not the fault of the St. Lucia suppliers? After listening for a short while, I turned off because they were simply not making any sense, because their only concern was to blame government for what was taking place with price rises. Yet price rises has taken place all over the world. Yet just after listening to these reprobates, here I was reading an article where the Cornwall community was being hit hard by the cost of living crisis that was taking place in their country. Many countries in Europe and other parts of the world were having their problems. One of the biggest laughs I have had for a long time in listening to Timothy on one of his programs, talking about Tropical Trump and what has taken place in the US election, and whether that can be repeated here, as he is the tropical one. Mon Dieu, give me a break. The thinking is absolutely bonkers. I'm saying this because I also remember the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago once saying that Tropical Trump wants to talk or discuss crime. Can you believe that? However, whilst literally floored me was when he said he wants to discuss crime, and if that was, as if that was not a crime in itself. I didn't say it. The Trinidad Prime Minister said it. Gonzalez of St. Vincent also made an ass out of him. We must never forget how Ireland treated our main air transport system or carrier, Liat, in the Eastern Caribbean, when St. Vincent and Antigua was putting so much into the airline, and he simply refused to put 1 cent. The St. Lucian opposition seems to be all now pulling away from CIP and is on a health bandwagon now. I must quite categorically say that I don't mince my words to the extent I say openly that healthcare is a headache, because this unity government seems to be bearing the problems that was left behind, because very little was done by the last government. We must never ever forget that OKEU was sitting there for years with nothing being done, because privatization, as alleged, was being discussed. Victoria had so many problems, and that is when we saw people sleeping on the floor, and a man in pain who was supposed to be a supporter of Ireland, pleading with him to do something for the health service of the country. I nearly cried when I heard him, and he was in tears. Well, even today, his words were fallen, so to speak, on deaf ears. We also heard an elderly lady pleading, even to the extent she said that God will punish you, Alan. Have you forgotten? And this is a lady who said that she had always voted for the United Wreckers of the Poor. What many fail to understand and comprehend is that leadership is unbelievably important in rough times. However, my advice to the Prime Minister is that as a government, they must always strive to put things back in place that will give every citizen an equal opportunity. We must search for ways to make the economy work better, and all St. Lucians have a part to play. We are stakeholders. Many must remember that, more so the opposition, who are quick to criticize for criticizing's sake. It's at this stage, I'll take a second break and I'll be back. Welcome back to Moving Forward. And I was talking about criticizing for criticizing's sake. What they simply forgot is that government can't do everything, regardless of which party is in power. It is essential that business prospers if unemployment is not to escalate. Therefore, there is a need for investment. And the only way we will attract overseas investors is to create the environment in which they will prosper. The last government did not realize that fact. That is why they had to invest with the people's money. And Cobalt was classical, as I've mentioned before. And further to that, Ojo Labs was another. Government cannot afford to keep tinkering at policy making. What we saw with the last government was half-baked measures that did not work. Therefore, this government must keep enticing the private sector by policies that will be attractive. It is important that the private sector must also play a part in taking risk and being innovative and creative. On another front, on hearing the speech of the Prime Minister in Dominica, I'm inclined to side with him 100% when he says that they, the opposition, cannot defeat us with policies, so they lie. That is so true, because they come up with ideas with the turning of the tide when they were in power. So the so-called tide was always turning and changing, and they simply did not have the gumption to understand that. What Philip is doing that seemed to be taking its toll on their grey matter is that he is without a doubt the pragmatic, because he has concentrated on efforts to relieve poverty because of his focus on the poor people. The unity government under his leadership, as I've mentioned before, is pragmatic and is simply colorblind in terms of party colors. A lot of people don't like that. What we saw under the last inept Prime Minister was that there was a continuing economic bleakness for the poor in our society, which created a political problem for them. But they were simply too blind to see, because standing before them was their family, friends, and foreigners. In delving into our history before 1997, people were ready to accept wrenching economic changes. However, the resulting allegedly corruption and incompetence was what squandered much public trust. It was all about self-enrichment, aggrandizement, and alarming inability among politicians to communicate with the voters, which had many people feeling tired and cynical. That feeling escalated even more when Alan Chastanet became the Prime Minister of St. Lucia. Many ruling politicians are accused of being arrogant, as I said before, and sleazy. And many are saying that the so-called PR of the United Records of the Poor, that he is one who allegedly was the worst and therefore should have left politics and enjoy the fruits he earned from, when he was in power. In looking back, what we saw with the last government was without a doubt sloppy, and therefore made it very difficult for some to simply progress. Looking back, the relationship between the ruling party and the opposition was simply non-existent. Yet, there they are, the same opposition, now crying that this government does not converse with them, when in truth and in fact, they simply forget their behavior when in power to the opposition. Well, if they are crying, then they have a lot of crying to do, haven't they? When in power, they also cared and concentrated on the voters and the constituencies. They voted for them when they won, and they hoped would keep them in power. But all that glitters then was not gold, because there is a good God above. What they did not realize was that there was many in those constituencies that were feeling the brunt of the economic malady that existed during their time in government, because they failed to have realized that there were those who were the have-nots, as they concentrated on those who had. What a political blunder and incompetence. To the extent, as I mentioned before, Alan had the audacity to say openly that his class did not vote for him. What a pathetic statement that any politician can make. It is the same when a particular politician made the remark that you are crying, as I've mentioned before, well, you have a lot of crying to do. in theory, you have only started, I'm saying to him, crying, because there is much more bust ass to take place because of your working class background. Alan also failed to realize that during his term in office, that being prime minister, that he was being seen by many in the population, as I mentioned before, as the Prince of Darkness, because that is how many saw the effect he had on their lives. Many, I am sure, are aware that politics is not always fair, but some live in hope. And when that is not forthcoming, as was with the United Records of the Poor, people simply rebelled and made every effort to back them, to kick them out of office in a humiliating manner as never seen before. There is no doubt in my mind that we have a popular prime minister because he is one that is determined to clean up what was and is interested in securing justice and deterring future corruption, not in obtaining revenge. The Prime Minister is making every effort to secure a health service that is one of the best in the Caribbean. There's no doubt that services like health bear the brunt of government, as I said, or money. Nevertheless, Philip and his unity government are making every effort in that direction to put our medical services back on course. Why? Because he has confidence in our doctors, nurses, ancillary workers that keep the flag flying. The last government simply forgot that when they were in power, they simply neglected the health service because of their privatization's ambitions. That was greater than patients' care. We must never forget how long it took to open OKEU, and that happened only because of COVID-19. Don't forget, ladies and gentlemen, that there were no funds for antibiotics. Patients had to buy their own medicines, bring their own sheets, pillows, cases, even water. Have we forgotten all that? Are our minds that short? And now the same opposition who were in government wanted to blame this government for the mess they left behind in the health service. I'm simply peeved by the dishonesty of the opposition. That is why the permanent secretary must now go elsewhere, because, as alleged, that she aided and abetted what took place. Doctors, nurses during that period were overwhelmed with the number of patients they had to deal with. I say this in all sincerity, Alan. You must never even have a sniff of power ever again. And the unity government must do everything in their power legitimately to make sure that they defeat the psychopathic opposition that exists in St. Lucia. When I look at the opposition, more so their chairman, the head of their PR, who were at one time alleged mortal enemies, are now hitched up together with the other higher echelon of that party, is nothing more or less simply pathetic. When they complain about nurses leaving, the question is why? Many are doing so in order to get access to going abroad because of the temptation put before them. When we see in the United Kingdom, or what we see in the United Kingdom, is that more foreign nurses are being registered for nursing jobs than indigenous ones. Before closing tonight, I want to say that if I had a crystal ball, I would advise the government to concentrate on our tourist and service industries, because that is where we will see some growth in the short term. However, we have to train our people to be more professional and to really look to see as to what are the important areas in tourism that sells. It is important that we educate the workforce from the taxi drivers upwards to the needs of the customers, the tourists. We must, if necessary, use the government information service and the rest of the media as a propaganda machine to enlighten all St. Lucians of the importance of tourism to us. This market or industry is fast becoming our main industry, and therefore, like bananas, We have to do everything in our power to safeguard our jewel in the crown. However, in talking about growth, we must bring the necessary skills to the country, more so the high-tech skills that we need. Therefore, once again, I say this, that where our Taiwanese and Japanese diplomatic friends are concerned, we need to beg, if necessary, to implore them to help in that respect. I will take my next break and I will be back. Welcome back to Moving Forward. And I was talking about our diplomatic friend, and I must say tonight, once again, Taiwan is doing more than is necessary. And therefore, we have to be by their side on the world stage. What I want to emphasize is that with just average good management on the part of government and the private sector, a decade of substantial economic growth can be expected. And this is what most companies are counting on as they plan ahead. In looking at the government's 38 months in office, I found it difficult as a political scientist and a researcher to be critical of the government's performance, considering what they inherited. The time period in office is without a doubt too short a period to make any serious judgment one way or another. Policies take time to come to fruition, and I'm sure by the middle of next year or before, we will see a country that will be the pride of the Caribbean. I believe that the course this government has taken is a steady one. In talking to the man on the street, many seem happy with the government's performance. However, two things I want to bring to the fore, and one concerns something I read in relation to a strong supporter of the United Workers' Party, and not the United Wreckers of the Poor. She made a statement that the present opposition cannot win an election unless they remove all the upper echelon of the party that is there right now and bring in new capable people and women who can move the country forward. There was never a truer word spoken, and this is by one who was a strong supporter of the party and still is, but with a better and more adequate leaders, she said, instead of the moronic group that now exists. And she's a lawyer. The lady hit the problem without flinching. Bravo, bravo for speaking your mind, good lady. That is what we need more in this country than the crap we hear from Alan, Guy, Coco, Lorum, Spider, Nancy, and a few real reprobates of that party. Lastly, tonight, I want to ask all those who want to put heat on the present unity government in terms of the health service, and want to put all the blame at this government's doorstep, when in truth and in fact, they were the ones to destroy the health service we had before 2016. I was not perfect. It was not perfect, but it was adequate and was serving the purpose of the people here. Now here is my question to the United Wreckers of the Poor. Why don't you ask your so-called leader to account for the $7.3 million that he virtually gave away to friends, etc., on the pretext of paying for COVID-19 vaccine we never received? Just think of it, ladies and gentlemen, of any party, that the amount could have done. What could that have done for the health of the service of this country we call St. Lucia? Therefore, I say to the United Wreckers of the Poor to stop playing games and pretending that you are whiter than thou, when it was you, your so-called party and leader, who literally destroyed the public health service in this country. What is now so upsetting is that these same reprobates now want to be critical of this government and therefore lay all the problems and blame that now exist in the polyclinic and local medical health centers OKU, etc., when they had 5.5 long years to make it better. Instead, they made it worse and almost non-existent. What a pathetic lot of mamagayas, a blatant, dishonest people who like to play games with the public because, don't forget, that they are mendicants, jackasses, and barking dogs. I therefore say to the people of this country to use the great matter that God has given you to decipher right from wrong, truth from fact, or fiction. Ladies and gentlemen of this country, I tell you this, that Philip is truly the man of the people and is making every effort to put things right in the medical service. That is without a doubt due to the utter crap that the last government left behind, because they were keener on privatization. Give us back the $7.3 million, because it can do so much for the public health of the country at this juncture of our lives and existence. Question I'd like to ask them before I close, and that is without reservation, what did your government did or do with the CIP monies that was supposed to be in the consolidated fund? When one looks at what Dominica is now doing with this fund, it is amazing. The thought of building an international airport with CIP funds. Not only that, we see our beloved Prime Minister also using CIP funds to develop our health sector. And further to that, has every intention of building the last finger of the OKU. Therefore, instead of 4, there will be 5 fingers. Records of the Poor, I say this to you in all sincerity, to put that in your pipe and smoke it. Once again, I end tonight by saying to the Eastern Caribbean countries that have diplomatic ties with Taiwan, that we have to be grateful for all they have done for us with an open heart. They even help those who they don't have diplomatic ties with. It is now more and more important that we say to China, enough is enough, and that Taiwan is part of the Far Eastern countries, but not part of China, regardless whether they speak the same language and have come or have some customs that are similar. We must never forget that other countries rule Taiwan, and now they are unique in that they own in their own right, without where before they had 21 tribes, now they have 16 to 17 recognized. The world must never forget that. They are great people and a great country. And that is why I'm proud to say often, Ila Formosa, the beautiful country. God bless them all, because the One Most High will be there for them always. And we have to be there with them also. Once again, I end by saying to all St. Lucians that we are born black and should be proud of that. And be proud that we are a product of this country we call St. Lucia, and not the product of any other country. God bless you all. Good night to you, and good night. Go in peace to serve the One Most High. Goodbye and good night.